Back with Dr. Kelly, and we are on part 4 of this really important topic. I want to address something called the leaky gut syndrome for a moment. So, our gut, our small intestine and large intestine, really is comprised of a long tube from our mouth to our anus, if you will, and it's really one cell thick because we want things to be able to transmit from the inside out and not so much from the outside in, although that does happen as well, fluid and the like. But when there's excessive inflammation, what occurs is that the distance between the cells starts to gap and bad things can start to get out. And they are intended to stay in the gut and to leave through our fecal material. But when they get out of the gut, they do cause inflammation. It's very hard to really understand the importance of this, but a leaky gut is not these big gaps. These are tiny, tiny holes measured in angstroms, which is 10 angstroms is a normal size, and it's really about a million times smaller than a pinhead. So we're not talking about big gaps, but a lot of the bacteria and virus are structured so that they're just too big to get out, but when our gut leaks, that's not the case. So what causes this leaky gut? Well, an immune system overload. Remember, the bugs control your immune system, and when things go awry, the effectiveness of any system breaks down. Gluten, we absolutely know, creates a relationship with an antibody, particularly the gluten end of gluten, and causes the leaky gut. And then those critters, the antibody and gluten complex, leave the gut and start influencing the brain negatively, as we've talked about in the past. Excess sugar, which ultimately leads to inflammation, is another extremely big cause for leaky gut. Genetically modified foods can cause it as well. And then our own personal stress. When the cortisol from our adrenal glands go up, that can in turn result in a leaky gut. So really, who cares? Well, we all should care about this, and we haven't talked about it. It's certainly not a common medical diagnosis, although you will hear it in the offices of naturopaths, nutritionists, and chiropractors. But bad bugs do bad things. And there is a way to determine if you have a leaky gut. There's a test by Cyrex Array 2 test, and it's a lab that your physicians can send your information to, and it measures your antibody relationship or elevation to something called LPS, which is a lipopolysaccharide. Well, what an LPS is really is the part of a bad bacteria that escapes through the leaky gut, and the body tries to fight it with an antibody, and you can actually measure the amount of this in your system. And while that's not commonly done, it can be secured through your physician. It then creates havoc in the system. And really, the most important thing I want to underscore is the havoc it creates in the brain. Starting at the bottom of the list, we know that a leaky gut, when it releases some of these toxins, can cause anxiety. It can cause ultimately depression, and then attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is not uncommon. Autism is on that list, and our big concern, of course, is Alzheimer's and senility. We are seeing this a huge, huge rise. I will say that the tryptophan, which is a precursor to serotonin, is tightly regulated by what happens with our bug population. And that's the connection that we don't often understand. What's very fascinating today is that Alzheimer's is now being referred to as our type 3 diabetes and used in the same sentence because of the excessive sugar challenges we're seeing with people who do have Alzheimer's. We talked a little bit about when you have too much in the system, you get glycation, where the sugar attaches to a protein or a fat and causes a mess of the molecules and tangles. And in Alzheimer's, the fluency of the neurons and the axons become challenged. We also see the insides of the arteries damaged. We discussed that in the very first module on sugar, but ultimately resulting in decreased blood flow, which is not good for the brain. That also contributes to senility and down the road Alzheimer's. And the data is very, very clear that obese people are more prone to diabetes. Obviously, they're eating themselves into that condition. And what's also very clear is that, therefore, then diabetics are much more prone to Alzheimer's. It's very important to understand these connections. How in the world did it get so bad? Well, we have been killing our good bugs for a long, long time. And as I mentioned in my first slide on this module, Dr. Blazer and Dr. Perlmutter have written these great books about the why, and if you're really interested, you should pick those up. But basically, gluten is destroying our bug population, as is excess sugar, as is the introduction of genetically modified foods. Now, we know that chlorination causes the bug population to be challenged, and a lot of our water carries too much chlorine. Pesticides and herbicides, I mean, look, they're designed to kill bugs, and we have this ever increasing amount of something called glyphosate, which is Roundup, which is a really strong herbicide, and it's put in our seeds and on our crops. Basically, it tells the plant, don't worry, I will allow you to get past the herbicide. You won't die from it, but all the bugs around you will. What's also quite upsetting is high fructose corn syrup absolutely feeds our bad bugs in addition to challenging our liver. That's one of the reasons why high fructose corn syrup is so challenging to our body. And ultimately, we're just taking too many antibiotics. We're taking them for viral conditions for which the antibiotic can't even help. And it's very frustrating because we are eating foods that contain antibiotics. And a matter of fact, the cows consume 70% of all the antibiotics produced in this country. Just this last year, 2 million Americans suffered from drug-resistant infections, meaning we've been taking so many antibiotics that they no longer exist to the degree that they can kill the bugs, and about 23,000 people died from these infections that were before our abuse of antibiotics actually responded to medication. So our bottom line here is we are starving our bug population. We don't repopulate it. We don't feed it. Why? Because we didn't know. But now you do. So let's move on to the last and final module and try to figure out some simple strategies about how in the world we can fix this.